Hello everyone, I'm Samidha Walvekar, an intern trainee at CyberSapiens. Today I will be discussing an intriguing cybersecurity vulnerability, CVE-2023-36845, and shedding lights on its various facets. Before we dive in, here's a brief overview of today's presentation. We'll begin with an introduction, followed by what is CVE, then focusing on the specifics of CVE 2023-36845, its impact, mitigation strategies, and lastly, the conclusion. Let's delve right into our main focus today, the CVE 2023-36845 vulnerability. This vulnerability affects the Juniper network's Junos OS, specifically on their EX and SRX series devices. What makes this vulnerability particularly concerning is its ability to allow an attacker to execute the code remotely without any authentication. So the attacker can achieve this by manipulating the PHP-RC environment variable within the JWeb, which is the web management interface of Junos OS. So in the further slides, we will understand what is meant by the PHP-RC environment variables and its technicalities. So let's see some bullet point about this vulnerability. This vulnerability was brought into light by Watchdog and Vulncheck in 2023. As we have seen, it has affected the JWeb of Junos OS on EX and SRX series devices. Also, it allows remote code execution without any means of authentication. And now in terms of severity, there is a slight variance in assessment, as Vulncheck has labeled it as critical, while the Juniper networks themselves categorized it as a medium vulnerability. So as we proceed deeper into the discussion of the specific vulnerability or CVE, it's important for us to understand what CVEs are. CVE basically stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposure. It's a system that records the security threats in both softwares and hardwares. So it's like a library for different cybersecurity threats. It provides a standardized language for the professionals to discuss, understand, and address the vulnerabilities worldwide. It acts as a reference point. Each CVE gives detailed information about a particular threat, allowing the organizations to understand how risky it is and how to fix it. So whenever a new vulnerability emerges, it is documented and assigned a unique CVE ID, and then it is added to the CVE database. This database is open to everyone, so making the detailed information about the vulnerability accessible to everyone publicly. So let's delve deeper into the CVE 2023-36845. This is a vulnerability specific to the way PHP handles its environment variables on the Juniper's web interface. It allows the attackers to modify the environment variables within the framework of the Juniper SRX and EX series devices. So now we'll understand what are environment variables. They are the dynamic values that are stored in a system that the application uses to understand the environment in which they operate or run. In the context of this specific vulnerability, there's a particular environment variable called as PHP-RC that's critical. So by tampering with this, attacker can alter the PHP's action on Juniper's web platform. This can result in PHP running with a wrong setting or even executing the attacker's code or the arbitrary code. So the PHP-RC environment variable in PHP tells the system where to find its configuration file. That is, it determines the path for php.ini configuration file. And if this file is manipulated by the attacker, then it can cause the PHP to behave differently. That is unintended behavior of PHP. So attackers can exploit this by using the method involving a data protocol and a PHP directive, which is called as auto prepend file directive. So in simpler terms, this allows the attackers to insert malicious PHP code, which can trick the Juniper device into executing the malicious PHP code. By doing this, attackers will be able to access the system information or also be able to insert a command into a device, like a command called who am I. So now we'll see what is the data protocol and what is auto prepend file directive with PHP. So simply the data protocol, it is a method that allows the data to be placed directly inside the web request. In this specific vulnerability, attackers can exploit this feature to sneak in harmful PHP code into the Juniper device operation. And the auto prepend file is another tool used by the attacker. It defines which file the system should be read first. Attackers can twist its function to force the system to run the harmful code right from the start. So when the attacker combines these tactics with the manipulation of PHP-RC environment variable, it becomes a potent strategy to embed and execute the malicious PHP code on the targeted device. Now we will see the impact of this particular vulnerability. The implication of this vulnerability are vast. It allows the remote code execution. Remote code execution allows the attacker to run arbitrary commands, those commands which can't be run by any usual user, and this can lead to gain full access of the compromised system. Next, it is unauthenticated access. Attackers can exploit this bug without any credentials. So the absence of that authentication barrier can increase the ease of malicious exploitation. Next impact is potential network compromise. The primary line of defense is firewalls and switches are vulnerable. So the attacker can manipulate the network traffic, and this can lead to the compromisation of the data and communication. Next impact is secondary attacks. Compromised systems can be a gateway for further attacks. So the attacker can leverage the initial breach to launch different additional attacks within the network. And last, it is reputation and financial damage. Exploiting this vulnerability can trigger data breaches, which can lead to some legal consequences. Also, the organization may face eroded customer trust and financial setbacks. So after identifying the threats, now it's necessary to implement some mitigation strategies. Let's explore the essential mitigation strategies to counteract this vulnerability. The first important step is patching. Update all the devices with the latest security patches which are released by Juniper networks. Restricting external access. Protect the system by limiting remote access and only allowing the trusted IPs or networks to access the management interface. Next important mitigation is input validation. By sanitizing and validating the user input, malicious threats can be kept at a bay. So we can ensure that they don't exploit the systems. Network monitoring. Use network monitoring tools to detect, analyze, and respond any suspicious activities. Those are targeting the Juniper devices. Lastly, the important mitigation is regular audit. Conducting some periodic system audits is important, and reviewing the configurations, identifying vulnerabilities, and making necessary changes after the identification of particular vulnerabilities is also important. So through these strategies, potential threats can be mitigated. Let's wrap up with a concluding remark on this particular CVE. We have delved deeper into CVE 2023-36845, a vulnerability affecting Juniper Networks Junos OS on EX and SRX series devices. It enables unauthenticated network-based attacks, allowing remote code execution. So this flaw basically occurs due to modification of PHP environment variable on the JWeb interface. Attackers can craft a request to manipulate this environment variable, that is PHP-RC variable, and then execute the arbitrary code remotely by modifying the PHP configuration file. So Juniper Networks has also acknowledged the threat and rolled out different security patches. Thus, the users are recommended to update the systems accordingly. So that's all for today's session. Thank you.